My name is Devon Kramer, and this is my NDE story. So it started in 2017. I was actually out playing with my lab and I came in to make lunch. And so I had gotten some CBD because of the fact that I was dealing with very intense kidney stones and I wanted to get off of pain medication. So I tried something natural. And so I had taken the CBD, and within probably about a minute, I felt like something was drastically wrong. And I didn't know exactly what it was, but it felt like my body was completely shutting down on me. And so what I had done is I had reached for my phone and I had called 911. I had explained to the person on the phone that basically I felt like I had had an adverse reaction to something, that I was poisoned. I felt like my body was completely just giving up. And about that time, I dropped the phone and I had collapsed. So the next thing that I know is that I'm standing up and I started walking around my house. And in this state, I felt like everything was completely different. Colors were brighter than I had ever seen them. It was like looking at the sun, except for it didn't hurt your eyes. You had no problem doing this. And the other thing that was weird is that time didn't feel like it fit right. It was like I was in time, but also outside of time. In fact, I went around the corner and I looked at the TV. And prior to this happening, I was watching the news. And when I looked at the TV this time, it was completely still, as if nothing had happened whatsoever. It was just frozen. And so at this point in time, my first thought was actually that a comet or something massive happened, and everybody died at the same time. Everybody was in this state. And about the time that I had had that thought, I had another thought that kind of overrode it, that was like, no, this is just you. And so in that moment, I felt this intense fear that instantly got washed away by this security, this okayness, and this love. Like it just washed over me that everything was going to be okay. And so at that moment, I sat down in this chair that I had had, and I was ready for whatever was coming next, but I didn't want to do it alone. And at that time, I was actually agoraphobic. I didn't leave my house. I didn't have friends. And so my best friend was my lab. And so I called Nova over to me, and she came over and she had rested her head on my lap. And I remember petting her and feeling this just so glad that I wasn't alone kind of thing. And about that time, I felt like something was moving towards me very, very quickly. And I just continued petting her. And I don't know if she saw me, I don't know if she heard me, but I knew that she was there with me. And so as I was petting her, I closed my eyes. And about the time that I felt like I was moving towards or into something, all of a sudden I felt this jerk back. And I look up and I've got these EMTs who had come through my front door. They had to have, they didn't come through the back, had come through the front door and were trying to get me to open my eyes. They were yelling at me to open my eyes, to speak, to say anything. And I couldn't at that time. I remember just looking up, just completely like out of body kind of thing. And so finally, I had come around. I started having a little bit of a conversation, but it was a highly traumatic experience for me. And so it took them 3 hours. These were some local EMTs in a very small town. It took them 3 hours of sitting with me to convince me that I was not dead. I was absolutely set on the fact that this wasn't real. And so by the time they finally got me to realize that I was not dead, that I was in this state, they basically let me know that what I had done is I had gotten a hold of some CBD that happened to be laced with something that caused a basically adverse reaction. And it caused me to have a stroke that I didn't actually know until years later, because of the fact that whatever was in this ended up doing the exact same thing that happened to me years later. And so at that time, the EMTs had left, and I had a family that was now there. And so when I woke up the next morning, my whole entire life had changed. Everything had changed from that point. I was no longer afraid of death. And because of that, I wanted to study. I wanted to understand what had happened to me. Because although they tell me that it was a CBD reaction, everything that I experienced in that moment was unbelievable. And there was no book that I could find or anything that actually explained it. So I started expanding and studying everything I could get my hands on. I studied the Kibbaline and the Bible. I studied the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It didn't matter where it came from, the type of knowledge. I studied everything from chakras to frequencies to Nikola Tesla, quantum physics. I wanted to understand that experience that I had had. And through this process, I actually started doing meditation. And I got to a place where I could actually meditate for 30 minutes and it would feel like it was 3 hours. And in these meditations, I was receiving so much information. I was receiving mathematical equations and patterns and downloads, and I just kept receiving over and over. In one of these downloads, I had actually received a message that I was going to die at the age of 45. And so at first, when I got this message, I didn't really accept it. I didn't really pay that much attention to it, but it continuously kept showing up in my meditations. And so finally, I decided to accept it. I figured that the average person isn't really afraid of dying. They're afraid of how they're going to die. So I asked in this meditation how I was going to die. And it told me that I was going to have a brain issue and that I wasn't going to have any pain whatsoever. And so at this point, it kind of changed everything for me. I no longer was afraid of even living. I started facing all of my fears. I faced my agoraphobia, started going out in the world. I faced my anxiety and my social anxiety. I faced my depression. I faced basically just being alone and basically started making friends. I got a job as a dog trainer. I met my future wife there. I became a leader of a local church. I started working with the homeless on the weekends, and I was running bingo on Friday nights for over 200 people for the elderly every single Friday night. My life became about helping people because just fear did not block anything whatsoever for me. And that's when I actually started Nine Vibes Universal, the Facebook page, because I wanted to share my downloads with people. And as I was sharing my downloads, people were basically coming to me with questions. I would go into meditation, I'd receive an answer. And so I just continued that cycle over and over. My life was going so well that I completely forgot about the message that I was going to die at 45 until one Sunday morning, I was working at church and I started having this pain in the back of my ear, and it continuously got worse and worse. I got exceptionally nauseous. I couldn't see straight. And so I was rushed to the ER. And I found out at the ER that I had suffered brain aneurysm. So basically, I was the youngest person on the stroke floor, and they had ran an MRI and found that I had a brain aneurysm. But because of the fact that I had gone in, because of the fact that I was rushed in, it actually ended up saving my life. And so from that moment on, I was a believer. I started teaching local classes, and then when COVID hit, I started teaching virtual classes. I wanted to help as many people as I could with whatever time I had, because it just didn't matter to me more. I wasn't afraid of death and I wasn't afraid of living. I actually just recently finished a book called Living Aligned by 369, which is a guidebook to mastering your own energy, from numerology to chakra core memories to aerokinesis, which is basically just working with energy you can't see, such as, the wind. I basically understood that life is about creating. It's not about being created. And the more that you trust in the universe, the more that the universe responds. And so from my experience at the very, very beginning of having that experience where the CBD was involved, to coming full circle to realizing that all of it together was showing me this moment where if I wouldn't have paid attention, I was going to die. And so it saved my life. And for me, that's exactly what a near-death experience is about. Thank you for watching.